Hello, my name is Osha. I like talking about US history and international human rights law. Today is March the 14th, 2026. It's been roughly 15 days since the inception of the US Israeli war against Iran. And there's been a lot of casualties, damage, on both sides since the war began, and also there's been collateral damage as the GCC nations have been struck and have lost a lot of casualties as well. Lebanon, Hezbollah, which is an ally of Iran, they've been struck by Israeli forces. So there's been a lot going on. The economy has been hit. Oil prices have been going up all over the world. So there's been a lot of fallout, blowback from the ongoing hostilities. Today, what I want to do is I'm going to quickly read from the Bible. Today is the Sabbath. Today is a Saturday. Saturday is actually a Sabbath day, right? It's supposed to be a holy day. So I'm a Christian, but my intention is not to proselytize, right? I'm a historian. I'm doing this, been doing these videos as a historian, as somebody who I have a law degree. I'm interested in law, and but we consult a variety of sources, right? So the Bible is also very good, very significant for guidance, for even reasoning, right? For logical reasoning, for wisdom. And so there's something pertaining to wisdom that I want to quickly read from the Bible, and it's with regard to war. So bear with me, please. Today again, it's a Sabbath day. I might do a video explaining why we Christians actually we worship on Sunday and not on Saturday, which is actually a Sabbath day. So I started a trend that normally maybe on Sunday I try and pick some um, objective guidance or principle from the Bible. I've been doing that in some of my videos and apply them to history, right? So today, that's what I want to do. I'm just going to read quickly from the Bible, and it's on counting the cost of war, the justification for going to war, or the planning, the rationale for going to war before going to war. So that's what I'm going to do today. Today I'm going to quickly read from Luke chapter 14, from verses 28 to 32. This is actually a saying by Christ. It was an idiom. He liked to talk in idioms. That's Jesus Christ. He liked to talk in idioms, and this is a quick idiom that I'm going to be reading from. And again, it's from Luke 14, and I'll explain my rationale subsequently. I'll have my discussion, but let me get it out of the way because I'm reading from I have my computer right here, so it's kind of heavy maneuvering. So bear with me, please. So this is Luke chapter 14 from verse 28. Okay, I'm going to start reading. For which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able to, with 10,000, to meet him who comes against him with 20,000, or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So that's it. Let me get it out of the way. It's been heavy. So you see, it's clearly there what I'm trying to draw out, and it's going to be like the basis for my argument, my reasoning. This discussion. I want to make this discussion brief, and I'm trying to explain why I've been doing these videos talking about Iran and their history and the Persian people. So I'm not supporting Iran. I'm an American citizen, and I'm not justifying anything that the Islamic Republic has done. I'm a Christian, right? But the thing is, I also did international human rights law, and the principles that we follow. I'm a lawyer, I have a law degree. I'm not licensed practitioner. By the way, anything I say here is not legal advice. Um, but um, but I'm a lawyer. I got my law degree from George Washington University Law School, and I did international human rights law program at Oxford University in England. And international human rights law, there's international law, there are principles of law. Now, when the US uh, and Israel decapitated the leadership of Iran on February 28, 2026, with the assassination of uh, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, their supreme leader, that was a violation of international law, right? Principles of international law, because America didn't act in self-defense, right? There was no self-defense. There was no imminent threat. America was the aggressor, so that violates principles of international law. The other thing is America said, well, the reason why they did this also was that one of the objectives they had pointed out subsequently, it was like, it's like these varying justifications. One of them was that to the decapitation was done to instigate regime change. Well, that has not happened. That didn't happen. So why didn't regime change happen? It's been over 2 weeks now, and clearly, the leadership in America, the president, did not apparently seem to understand the mindset of the Iranian people, their zeitgeist. That's or their or each the raison d'être, right? The raison d'être is reason, justification for one's existence. What is their motivation, right? So you need to understand the psychology of people. The American psychology is different from the psychology of somebody from Nigeria, right? Or Nigerian, they have different, and they're affected by their history, right? So there's nuance. So we need to be able to understand nuance, and we can't expect that the way our motivations, uh, one national's motivation from one country is the same motivation of somebody from a different country as well. So, but in order for us to be able to understand the psychology of the motivation of a people or an individual or foreigner, knowing that person's history helps us to understand nuance. So it's one of the reasons I've been doing these videos, trying to present, understand the Iranian people. So I apologize to my Iranian friends or Iranians. My objective is not to stereotype them. So if I'm making any mistakes or errors, please, my Iranian friends can reach out to me and to correct me. So my objective is not to stereotype Iranians or misrepresent them. That's not what I'm doing. But I'm a historian. I'm trained as a lawyer. I'm trained to analyze, right? So I'm not just doing this as a random person. Of course, everybody has. You don't need to be a trained or a historian to exercise your First Amendment rights in America. First Amendment rights to express yourself, to express your opinion, right? You don't need to be doing to do that. But in doing that, sometimes you might tend to offend people. But people who are better trained, who are trained, are more likely not to, they're probably more likely to do it in a judicious manner. This is what I try to do. Again, I love, history, love studying culture. Um, so I clearly, it was clearly in the Bible passage I read that before you go to war, right, it is wise to count the cost in advance, to plan, count the cost instead of getting into it. You don't win war because it's very costly. It's a very costly enterprise. People die apart from the economic fallout, the hardship, the damage to the reputation. Your reputation is at risk. And so America has risked a lot of things. It is clear now that the president or the leadership didn't calculate a lot of things ahead of time, right? So it was a wrong mindset to assume that killing the leader of Iran would cause Iranians to overthrow their government or to effect regime change. That didn't happen. In fact, what ended up happening was Iranians now rallied around their government more, right? Intelligence reports that are unclassified that have recently been released, circulated in Reuters, it says that uh, Iran, there's no risk of regime collapse in Iran right now at all. So that was a miscalculation. So nuance wasn't understood. Um, you know, so I've been trying to study. So I'm just trying to give justification for doing these videos explaining the history of Iran. I'm not glorifying Iran. I'm not supporting the Islamic Republic. That's not what I'm doing, right? I'm just trying to provide the ability, show how you can analyze and present um, show an understanding of you why at least you're trying to understand your opponent. Iran, I'm not the one at war. Iranians are not my opponents, but I'm an American citizen. But as a historian, you want to be able to understand the motivation of, even if you're going to war as a historian. Yes, I want to understand people, understand history, understand culture. Iran is a major world heritage. Uh, 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 you know, it's got many World Heritage sites in Iran, right? I've talked about the Persian Empire with Cyrus the Great, how Iran was the first, it had the first university in the world. That's the Academy of Gundis Shapur, it's pronounced Jundis Shapur, Gundis Shapur. All these things. I've talked about so many different things, their poet Rumi, so many different things. I've talked about, the culture of Iran, but I'm not glorifying or saying what the Islamic Republic has done is right or anything like that. That's not my uh, my objective. So I try to provide balance. So I'm gonna do subsequent videos and try to see, okay, why is it that because it was the Shahs, that's the king of Iran. They were overthrown in 1979, and the Iranians established the Islamic Republic, and they've since had, a theocratic state, and that's what they have now. So so in studying the history, we want to understand why did that revolution occur? Why has it, still been entrenched after even over 40 years? And what happened? Or understand what is it that the people had against the Shahs, right? The Islamic what did the Islamic Revolution have against the Shahs of Iran, the kings? So now in the subsequent videos I'm going to now describe the biographies, the profiles of the Shahs. I'm going to start with the Pahlavis, right? And that's Reza Shah, right? Reza Shah Pahlavi, right? Who became the Shah of Iran in 1925, and then his son, of course, Mohammed Reza, Reza Pahlavi, right? He's the one who was deposed in 1979. So Americans have actually, at least U.S. media since the 70s, because I've seen many documentaries, 60 Minutes, Mike Wallace, his extensive interviews with the Shah when he was Shah at the time, when he was king of Iran at that time in the 1970s. And it's a kind of interesting. So America had a fascination with the Shahs of Iran, the Pahlavis. So I'm going to do videos. My subsequent videos. I'm going to actually discuss and look into their biographies. That's what I'm going to be doing. So we get an idea of the reasoning, the thinking, the justification, the rationalization, the psychology of, not all Iranians, but many of them with respect to their Shah and their government, right? You get a better understanding that way. Something that we tend to do in America, right? People, the American way of looking at others, Americans tend to always look from their perspective, from their understanding of things. While I was watching one of the documentaries, um, Mike Wallace did something, but I thought it was inaccurate, but he did it for the sake of Americans because that's how Americans find that, that's how they prefer to understand things, from how they understand things, from what they know. They don't want to go and study the nuance or total, uh, the total profile, like the full profile of an event or a foreign object that they're analyzing, that they're trying to understand. So Mike Wallace, when he was describing the secret police of the Shah, um, um, when he was describing their secret police, he said it was like America's CIA and FBI, which was very totally incorrect, right? So I realized that, so it's something we tend to do in America, right? We define something in terms of what we know and what we uh, identify with, and it sort of impedes the ability to understand nuance and complexity, right? So it's oversimplifying things. There's certain things I did mathematics, right? I did mathematics as well. There's certain things. It's a method for solving certain problems in mathematics. It's one way you can solve problems. You do it. You solve a problem by analogy. By you compare something that's complex that you don't know sometimes to make it easy. It's one method, right? I learned through mathematics, right? You can solve a problem by comparing it, looking for elements that are familiar with what you know, and how you would, resolve a problem that you know. Then you apply that same solution, right? Those same steps to this foreign thing that you're trying to analyze, right? So there are weaknesses to that, right? There are weakness because it wouldn't help you understand nuance. There's certain things that are just they're not translatable, right? Even in my culture, there's certain things because I'm Yoruba, I'm Nigerian. There's certain things from my Yoruba culture, even my Yoruba language, that just don't have parallels in America, in Western language or in English, And I guess it's a Western weakness, right? Because that's how. Let me not just say Americans. It's something that's done in a lot of Western cultures, right? So. Um, that's but it's sort of like it denotes some kind of it connotes some kind of intellectual laziness, right? When we can't go directly to the source and try and understand it from a whole, right? From a whole person or whole perspective, right? Instead of limiting it to exactly whatever it is and stripping it of its complexity, right? But anyway, so my objective was to explain why it is I'm doing these videos talking about Iran, the history. I'm not supporting Iran, but again, an international human rights law. Um, you can see the backlash that has occurred. Typically, many people, even the international community that was sort of against Iran, but because the America was the aggressor, you're seeing even America's allies criticizing the United States and parties that were neutral. Switzerland has come out and criticized America, saying America and Israel broke international law, right, by decapitating Iran's leadership. England, which is typically America's ally, they're both in NATO. England has, decided to sit this one out so far. And the same thing, Spain. Spain had, said it was not going to let America use its bases. So many nations, America's, very steadfast allies, you know, um, have been repelled, by what happened by the aggression of America and Israel. Now, uh, I don't support when I hear people in Iran chanting "death to America" or "death to Israel." I don't support that. But the thing is, part of understanding another people when they're saying it, understand their culture. If an American says something like that, even though they have free speech, it's assumed that they're planning to. The American culture because it's very violent. It's assuming that, well, they're planning to execute you if they say something like that. But understanding from that culture, maybe it's just an idiomatic expression and an implication that, and they mean something spiritual, or it's just a frustrated expression. I'm Yoruba, right? And I know from my culture, there are many mothers, right, in Nigeria, in Yoruba culture, they curse out their kids. They might say something that helpful like that. They hate that. They may say things that are terrible in frustration, right? But it's a typical idiomatic expression, right? Yorubas are known to love children and to invest a lot in their children and their success. But if you knew actually that there's actually, their idiomatic expression cursing out their kids, and it happens every day, right? But it's just part of the culture, and they don't mean it literally. So understand nuance. So when Iranians, you're hearing these things, do they actually mean it that they're planning to kill America? But maybe it's just their own act of defiance, right? Just their own act of defiance, rather than they're taking active steps to to execute Americans and things like that. What is so funny is the White House press secretary, the U.S. intelligence, U.S. defense, they've all stated now that no, that there's no evidence that Iran intends to actually strike America, and there was no prior indication that Iran was planning any attack on America. Despite saying those things, right? So those might just be idiomatic expressions that are, uh, unique to the culture, the people. You don't know. So that's, but if you study, right, if you study their history, their culture, then one might probably understand better rather than jumping to conclusions, right, and stereotyping people, right, uh, based on, flimsy tropes that are just self-serving, that will have ulterior motives or agenda. In any event, this has been very costly, and clearly it didn't look like um, the U.S. considered the cost of going to war. I saw a post by the president today, which was calling on China, Russia, European countries to sort of go to war against Iran or something like that because of the the blockading of the Straits of Hormuz, and which is bizarre, right? China is actually an ally of Iran. So is Russia. America has had imposed sanctions on Russia's oil, right, in 2022 for striking, for invading Ukraine. America just recently lifted those sanctions on Russia's oil, allowing them to sell oil to India, right? Since the since uh, Iran retaliated by, placing obstacles and, shuttering the Strait of Hormuz, right, and which has impeded um, India's access to oil. So over half, so Asia, right, is responsible for over 50% of global manufacturing value added. So that's finished goods, right? Products, manufactured goods. 50% goods we actually consume, over 50% comes from Asia, right? The number one uh, biggest manufacturer in the world is China, 30%, right? And there's Japan, and there's India. Now, they get their oil, right? Over 80%, or about 90%, close to 90% of the oil comes from um, that area of Strait of Hormuz. So this is impacting. It's going to have, oil prices have since surged, right? It's gone from $60 a barrel prior to the start of hostilities, prior to February 28, 2026. As of the last time I checked yesterday, it was over $100 a barrel. So it's going to affect prices. And, these manufacturing nations now have their access to oil has been impeded. And so America, that placed sanctions on Russia, now lifted sanctions, right? So it's now doing things that were against, you know, U.S. policy, right? So it's lifted sanctions against Russian oil, because of the war that America went instigated, ongoing hostilities, and so clearly America didn't intend to do that. So there's this fallout, that the blowback that America hadn't anticipated. Clearly, I recently learned, of course, we're all learning that President Trump also has recently, uh, it looks like the uh, U.S. Marines, roughly 2,500 to 5,000 U.S. Marines are being deployed to probably occupy to seize the Karg Island. Karg Island is about 50, it's possessed by Iran. It's about 15 miles from the mainland of Iran, and about 90% of their oil runs. They have terminals that run through that area, and it looks, but that while Iran has impeded the oil of the world, Iran has continued to sell its oil to China, because China buys 90% of its oil. So Iran has had no problem. So they're saying probably the purpose of the Marines going over is to seize Karg Island, or prepare for a ground invasion. Again, uh, U.S. military analysts, U.S. intelligence. If I've seen, I watch Andrew Bustamante, he's a former CIA case officer. Many others, everybody said, well, it will be a suicidal mission to actually go and invade Iran, for to land ground troops, right? And Iran said, well, they're waiting. They've been preparing for 20 years. Um, and even though, yes, we do have the strongest military, but remember Vietnam, right? So they're going to wage asymmetric warfare, guerrilla warfare. It's their terrain, and so they know how to, you know, they it's their terrain, right? It's mountainous. They're familiar. They're acclimated, more acclimated to the region, and they are able to set their traps and snares for a ground invasion. And remember, guerrilla warfare, they wage a war of attrition. They have a resolve to just stay in the fight, and the invading force, their bigger opponents, uh, it's just to get them to give up, right? That's the idea. But in the meantime, the bigger opponent that's invading them, they suffer a tremendous amount of casualties, and there's a huge psychological damage, the damage to the reputation, just like it happened to America in the Vietnam War. It's still, um, a lot of soldiers, a lot of people, Americans still feel very embarrassed and ashamed of that Vietnam War. This is not to discredit the valiant soldiers, American soldiers who went, but it's the soldiers go where the politicians send them to, and so that's the issue. Politicians are not the ones going to war, and politicians have to count the cost before sending valiant soldiers, American soldiers who are just following instructions, for sending them to to wage a war they can't win, right? And that was what happened in Vietnam. It was an unwinnable war. And so a lot of needless lives, very costly. And so that is why I read from that Bible verse, Luke chapter 14, um, verse 28 to, from verse 28 to was it 32, and talking about counting the cost before you go to war, or before one starts to look like a fool. People mock you for not having weighed the cost before going to war, because war is very costly, lots of sacrifices. So again, it's just been a lot of damage. When we talk about it in terms of the strikes, the last time I checked, I think there's been, between Israel and America. America said um, hit targeted Iranian sites, and about 6,000 strikes. Israel said, they have about 7,600 strikes, so over 13,000 strikes. Um, their objective has been to hit military installations, uh, nuclear facilities, um, You know, they've hit refineries. A lot of military installations hit naval capacity. America's said they've sunk about 90 Iranian vessels, and there's also that propaganda war, war of information. We don't know the facts, which could create a credibility gap. But America has hit Iran. There's been damage to a lot of buildings. They said about maybe 10,000 buildings have been hit. They've fallen down. Lots of buildings have been hit. Um, Iran, of course, has hit back. They said Iran has hit back with low cost drones. With a cost ratio of 100 to 1. So for uh, dollar, every dollar that Iranian, every dollar of Iranian drone strike, it costs America and Israel 100 times more to defend those strikes, right? So it's been very costly for America, and so uh, uh, you know Iran is hit asymmetrically, right? They've also hit the sites, they've hit the GCC countries, that's the Gulf Cooperation Council countries where America has a lot of military bases. So they've been hitting at US military bases. Total, the GCC nations are neutral. They're not fighting Iran. They haven't hit back, but they're the oil producing nations where America has a lot of military bases, right? And on the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and a lot of them they've had deaths. Among between the GCC countries, there have been about 20 deaths, maybe over 100 casualties. So that's and Iran has targeted them uh, intentionally, saying, well, they host. It's from their military bases, from their territories that America is launching attacks against them. And now Iran has insisted that it won't cease hostilities, even if America wants to stop. Set its own conditions that it won't cease hostilities until America withdraws completely from the Persian Gulf. This is now its demand, because it's saying that it's an existential threat to Iran, right? It poses a threat to Iran's existence. They've made it clear they're not going to give up their intent for their nuclear program ambitions. So they've shifted because they were they're acting in self defense. Um, so the GCC countries have had between them over 20 deaths, right? Syria's been hit because they have Iranian backed acolytes there. And so there have been deaths in Syria, there have been deaths in Iraq. Iraq, they're Shia Muslims and, sponsored um, Iranian backed fighters in Iraq, in Syria. Um, in Lebanon, Hezbollah. So Hezbollah, there've been over 700 deaths in Lebanon, 700 deaths. And the thing is that these bombings, even though Israel and America say they're targeting people, there have been civilians that have been hit. That's what happens in war. Lots of times civilians are hit. In the Second World War, um, 85 million deaths overall, right? Majority were civilians. Majority of the deaths were civilians, right? Because the bombs, they're really indiscriminate, and the airstrikes, the bombing. So lots of civilians have died. In Iran, there have been about 1,444 deaths over that. So maybe over 1,500 going over that. And majority are civilians, right? Yes, lots of military have been killed. There claims that about 10,000 military personnel in Iran uh, have been killed or wounded. Of course, there's been the um, inadvertent bombing of um, the school that killed about 175 Iranian school children, little girls, right? So a lot of damage has gone on. Israel So Iran has, and they've been had maybe over 18,000 wounded already, right? of 1,400 deaths in Iran, maybe 1,444 deaths in Iran. By the way, this information on the casualties, I got it from um, my sources, New York Times, Time Magazine, Reuters, and Al Jazeera. Uh, so, so over that's the casualties in Iran, and they've, of course, Israel has had its casualties between 15 to 20 deaths reported. There have been claims of underreporting in Israel and censorship. You know, to give a certain impression of the war that that Israel and the United States are winning. I don't know, but there have been claims of censorship in in Israel. So said roughly 15 to 20 deaths in Israel, and over 2,000 injured, over 2,500 injured in Israel. They've been hit from strikes from Lebanon and drone strikes and missile strikes from Iran as well. And the U.S., unfortunately, there have been 13 deaths. U.S. military, about 13 people have died. Uh, you know, and over 150 injured in the U.S. No, that's the military bases, right? Not the U.S. homeland has not been hit, and there doesn't seem to be any apparent threat. But you never know because that's asymmetric warfare. Um, There have been random killings, right? There's somebody who is from Sierra Leone who was actually a National Guard, and he'd been convicted years ago, and he was recently released. He was released. Um, he was a member of U.S. National Guard, and he had been convicted, imprisoned for trying to give support to ISIS. He was released, and it was last week. He killed a retired Colonel. His name was Shah, Lieutenant Colonel Shah. He's an instructor, and he was killed by this a person who was acting in sympathy to Iran. So uh, but he was subsequently killed himself. The attacker was killed by a member of the ROTC. They killed him. Um, so nobody can interrogate him or ask him, question him on what his motivation was. And prior to that, there was another naturalized citizen who was killed in Texas, right? I think the day after the strike, the decapitation strike. So you're going to have random acts, right? And no one can tell. And that's why they said the FBI sent out information saying, well, there are probably sleeper cells that are going to be activated in America. There claims that, well, there are going to be attacks in California. The governor and even the U.S. White House press secretary have dispelled that, discredited that there's no evidence, there's no sign, there's no indication. So you see, there's that psychological sort of paranoia, hysteria that a war triggers, especially from people. America had accused Iran of being the number one state sponsor of terrorism, right? And so, what is it they're going to use? They're going to use their sleeper agents, So you don't know. You always have to be on alert, right? But something that Iran has done successfully, I think that's unlikely. People who are triggered on the mainland, they'll do it out of their own self motivation, right? Out of their own self motivation, uh, uh, not probably from some active source or triggering from Iran. Because what Iran has been able to do is get even American public opinion on its side. 60% Americans are against the war. Most Americans think America acted, wrongfully by decapitating the leadership or being involved in the war, despite the fact that nobody likes. Let me not say that, but America was not in support. Americans are not in support of the Islamic regime in Iran. But two wrongs don't make a right, right? Americans see themselves, we see ourselves as a moral and just people, especially since we created the international rules-based order, right? So it doesn't make sense for us to be violating it. So Iran is winning in the public opinion war, right? It's sort of gotten people, the international community on its side. It's looking like the victim, like the one acting in self-defense. Even the United Nations has supported it, that it's acting properly in defending itself. It has a right to self-defense. Um, so and so that's basically it. Uh, in terms of the casualties, yeah, in terms of the casualties, Lebanon over 800 deaths, over 700 deaths, and about 1,500 wounded. Um, and the U.S., as I said, about 13 deaths and 150 wounded. So so still praying that the hostilities are, settled. There's detente soon, and the needless loss of lives, are stopped, cease, and the economy doesn't take more of a beating. All right, lives are more important than the economy. But hopefully, calmer heads prevail. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll continue with my discussions on Iranian history. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.